chronological type, kind of just. Okay, we are here today for the Veterans History Project with James Lilley. And like I said, I'd like to just start out with some background information. So, what year were you born?
1922.
Okay. And where were you born?
Ferndale, Michigan.
Okay. What did your parents do?
My mother was a housewife.
Mm-hmm.
My father was an engineer, and he was chief engineer for Pontiac Motors in Pontiac, Michigan.
Do you have any brothers or sisters?
I have 2 sisters and 2 brothers. And one sister still living, the other 3 have passed away.
Okay. And what school did you go to?
Birmingham High School for Birmingham, Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
Baldwin High it was called.
Okay. And so, how did your family do during the Depression? Was your father able to keep his job?
Yes, he was.
Okay. So you don't remember any real hardships?
No, not real hardships, no.
Okay. And do you remember anything particular about school during the Depression, or rations or anything like that, rationing?
Not to my memory.
Pretty young.
No.
Okay. What year did you graduate from high school?
1940.
Okay. While you were in high school, were your teachers trying to get you to pay attention to what was going on in Europe, or was you kind of not really worried about it?
No, I was quite attentive,
Mm-hmm.
and I did real good. As a matter of fact, they skipped me 2 grades. I graduated at 15 years old.
Wow. So what did you do after you graduated?
Then I went, my father being a General Motors man, and he had gone through what they call GM Tech.
Okay.
And he sponsored me and got me into that. And they waived my age, and I got almost 2 years of technical training, mechanical engineering.
So were you 15 then, or 16 when you went to that?
I was in my 15 teens.
Wow. So you're probably the youngest person there?
Probably I was.
Was that near the Detroit area then?
Yes.
Okay. And you went there for 2 years?
Mm-hmm.
So did you graduate from that, or did you
Yes.
get called into the service?
No, I got my apprenticeship.
Okay.
I accomplished that.
And then you start working with your father after that?
I was in my 17th year, and I used to spend a lot of time, because I was fascinated with aircraft.
Mm-hmm.
And I go to Selfridge Field, which was outside of Detroit. It's an Army Air Base, Selfridge Field. And I used to sit there in awe at the planes coming and going. And my father says, you're really interested? I said, yes. And I said, I can't get into it unless somebody waivers my age. I want to get into the Air Force cadet program.
Mm-hmm.
Well, my father had a good friend, a state representative was a good friend of my father's. My father spoke to him, and he says, I might be able to pull some strings.
Had you just turned 17? Or
Yes.
Okay.
And he said, we'll have to have a background check and scholastic and some records. And matter of fact, after it got started, a couple of friends of my father said, they call my father, here's Cliff.
Mm-hmm.
They said, Cliff, is Jim in? They called me James in those days. Is James in some kind of trouble? Well, why? What do you mean? He says, the FBI has been asking questions about his character. They know if I know anything. You ever see outside strangers visit him? And my dad said, what was it? He said, well, you have to have a background check and get a security clearance to get into this program.
Okay.
So evidently he's pulled the strings, and behold, I was called in to go to start the ground school for the Air Force cadet program.
And where was that located at?
Then they sent me I went to Selfridge Field first.
Okay.
And got my orders from them, and then they sent me from there to St. Petersburg, Florida,
Okay.
for ground school.
Do you remember about the time of year that was?
Oh, it was in the 40s, mid-40s, late 40s.
Okay, was it in the summertime?
Summer.
So it's very hot. when
Very
you went to
hot down
Florida?
St. Petersburg.
Okay. And what kind of area were you living in there? Was it just a barracks? Or?
No, the government had, some kind of deal they got, Don Cesar Hotel, I remember the name of it, and turned it into a military stay.
Okay.
And they stripped it more or less, and it was bunks, and you had to use the stairway unless you had a medical excuse.
Mm-hmm.
I was on the 7th floor, and we and other young men were brought in, and I was the youngest of the group.
Mm-hmm.
And we started a lot of book work and what this is all about. And they said, from here you will go to Chanutfield, Illinois for more training. And matter of fact, this class is for fighter pilots.
Oh,
And
did
then-
you want to be a fighter pilot?
Yeah, and that's what I want. And they had all small people.
Mhm.
He said, you'll see why.
Okay. What were the classes like? Were they just kind of basic engineering
Basic
classes?
engineering and a lot of military
Hmm.
into it, military procedure, and we had a lot of book work, how an aircraft flies, what keeps it up,
Mhm.
and the airstream and the lift and that kind of study. Then we went to Chinook Field, and they put us, they were so concerned at the time about being claustrophobic, being enclosed, because they said if you get into a fighter program, you're going to be in a small cockpit, and when that hood comes over you, he says a lot of people panic.
Mhm.
They can't stand. So they put us in these leak trainers and simulated flight, and they close you in.
Mhm.
And I think they washed out 2 or 3 in that first program at Chinook Field.
How many people do you think you started the program with?
There was about 20 of us.
Okay, that's not very many. And then while you were in Florida, when you were taking those classes, did you have to do physical activities
Yes,
too?
oh yeah, we had PT every day.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how long would you say that period of training lasted in Florida?
We were down there 6 months.
Okay. And then when you went to Chinook Field, was that in Florida as well, or is
No,
that?
that's Illinois.
Okay.
Chinook, it's in Illinois.
Okay. So they watched out a few people, and then did they start actually doing the hands-on, getting in planes? And,
Yes. Mhm.
and that was in Illinois as
Yeah.
well?
And while I was there, we had off time, and rumors get around pretty fast that in the South Pacific, in certain areas, the pilots were having trouble with their parachutes clinging together
Mm-hmm.
and not being, we call them parachute riggers, available, and some of their chutes were failing. So in my off time, I went down to the parachute department. They had a big parachute department where they trained riggers to pack parachutes.
Mm-hmm.
And I inquired, I said, I have quite a bit of off time throughout the week at times. I wonder if I could get into your class. Well, they hesitated, came back and said, well, we have an opening. So I learned, while I was at Chinook Field, beside my flight training, I learned to rig parachutes, and I actually got a certificate for parachute rigging, because I thought I could oversee and pack my own parachute.
That's nice. Not many people know how to do that.
From there,
Well, what kind of planes were you flying when you first started?
there it was all ground school again.
Okay.
And link trainer.
Mhm.
They're fixed deals.
Okay.
They said your first planes you'll be, and so they sent us then to flight school in Santa Ana, California. And that's when we first got our hands on an airplane with an instructor
Mm-hmm.
and start flying the small trainers,
Okay.
and graduated on up to some twin engine.
Mm-hmm.
And I completed that course, and they said, well, you've gone through, and your classification will be into the fighter pilot category.
Okay.
So from there, they sent me to, which is now Las Vegas Air Base, Nellis Air Force Base. In those days, it was McCarran Field, and that was the commercial airliner, or for a commercial called McCarran. The government had leased some of the runway spaces and hangar for the first phase of getting this new fighter program going. So I was in Las Vegas, then we graduated from that to the P-63 fighter planes.
Okay.
And they had gun cameras on them, and you could fix yourself on another aircraft chasing it through the sky, and it would show up on the film later. They would run, if you hold it in for so many seconds in these sites, they call it confirmed kill.
Okay.
Their terminology, kill. And so we did a lot of what they call dogfighting. And as a matter of fact, we got reprimanded for flying too low because they said the mechanics are tired of taking cactus out of our air schools. Then we graduated from the AT-6s to the P-63 fighter planes, and they said, well, if you go overseas, which this whole group, 7th Fighter Group, is scheduled to go overseas in the Pacific, you will be then into the P-51 Mustangs. And so I shipped out of there, orders were cut, and there was 12 of us that were shipped to Saipan in the South Pacific.
Okay. How about when you're going through all these different training courses in all these different states, you said you had a lot of time off. Was it just like a kind of 9 to 5 thing, training, or not all day long?
It wasn't all day long. We were probably 6 to 7 hours a day in training. And when I said off time, there was nothing at night, you know, or evenings. And we would start, we had to fall out and be in order by 7 in the morning. And then we would usually end up around 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock.
Okay, and then at nights or weekends, were you allowed to leave the base?
Yes, you could get a pass.
What did you usually do when you had spare time and allowed to leave like that?
Or just go in town, wander around, and do not much of anything. Las Vegas was the nicest. You could wander around because they were open 24 hours a day in Vegas. And
did you go to casinos?
did a little gambling, not much.
And then when you actually were training, you know, you said you started training with instructors. Did you ever get to train with someone that might be part of your crew, like any navigators or anybody like that? Or were you always with instructors?
Yeah, because we had no navigators because we did our own navigation.
Okay.
Because we got in the plane, we were solely by ourselves.
Oh.
And we had a lot of training on navigation and reading maps and get coordinates. So he says, because when your group, 7th Fighter Group, is assigned to the Pacific, you'll be flying over water 99% of the time, and there's no road signs or telephone poles. So pay attention to these navigation courses, because it's easy to get lost out in that big ocean. So I really, I'll admit it, my biggest fear, other than somebody shooting me, was to go down in that ocean out there, because it's a mighty big.
Yeah. When you were training, did you remain with the same 20 or so other people?
Yes.
Okay, and did you ship out with them as well?
I was shipped out with them, and then from other areas, more came. We had probably in our 7th Fighter Group about 120.
When you left, did you leave from California to go to Saipan?
Yes.
Did you take a ship or a plane?
They flew us to Hawaii, and then Hawaii picked up another military aircraft and flew us to Saipan. We went by air. And our planes were all shipped over, and they were there when we got there.
Okay. What was it like when you first landed there in Saipan?
I go, wow, how did I get into this? Really? And it's nothing but jungle.
Okay.
Very dense. And you could walk by like that wall there, and there could be 50 men, and you'd never see them. That's how dense it was.
Okay.
We were on the alert. They told us, do not run around, with any indication that you're a pilot, have anything to do with aircraft. The snipers are particularly after, so 24 hours a day, you ran to this, you ran to that. I wore fatigues. Kept my uniform, my flight stuff right in the plane, and I would run out there, change, get in, and we'd take off. And we were ordered, we could not have more than 4 in a group at a time. When we go to chow, no more than 4 sitting together.
Okay.
Because you're always trying to run in with hand grenades, and they were after the flight personnel.
Did that happen a lot? Were there a lot of instances?
Yes, oh yeah. We hear shooting quite often, and we'd get try to get underground. And our Quonset huts, we had guards. I got pictures of the guards. They were in our area, guarding our area all the time, all the time. And when you went to the military's kind of funny in a way. Latrines had to be so many feet away from sleeping and eating areas. And they clear these paths, and 2 days later they grow right back up again.
Right.
You'd take a buddy with you, and he'd stand guard while you're doing your thing in the latrine. It was, I don't want to brag about it, but it was quite stressful.
Yeah.
You were in fear of somebody trying to get you 24 hours a day.
Did you ever come into contact with civilians while staying there?
Yes, on Saipan. There were roughly 7,000 natives on the island. That was an island approximately 8 miles wide, 15 miles long, and it started out low and went up to almost 400-foot cliffs. And years ago in the paper, the Japs had done quite a propaganda program on the civilians there, that if we get ashore, we would rape and kill women, children, and blah, blah, which was...
They said that the Americans would.
Or we would.
Right.
So when the Marines first came there and started pushing the Japs out of there and taking over the base, they took whole families and went and jumped over this cliff. That was quite the news in those days. And finally the Japs were putting on civilian native clothes and that, and after the Marines would get through an area, they were finding to get shot in the back. They found it was, so they pulled out, radioed the ships to wipe out these 2 towns, Garapan and Tanapay.
Okay.
And if we ask the natives, what do you think of U.S. Marine? I won't say the word. We know, like Marines, they kill everybody. And
So most of the civilians then they didn't really get along with you.
oh, they got along with us.
Okay, that was a while ago
The
then.
Marines,
Okay.
because the Marines were the first ones there,
Okay.
and they said they kill everybody, and because of the shelling, I guess, of their deals. And from there, I was there, and we were escorting with the P-51 Mustangs. We were escorting the Liberators, which is B-24 bombers, and the new B-29s, which in those days was the largest bomber that we had. And they were all in the Pacific. They weren't used much in the European theater. They had a long range. It was a 16-hour round trip to Japan and back to Tinian and Saipan. Tinian was an island about 6 miles. You could see it off, real flat. And that's where the A-bomb was taken off from, the A-bomb to Japan.
Tell me about your first mission, first flight.
Scared like hell.
Yeah.
I was scared.
And that was just to go escort some other planes at that point?
Yes, but we could only escort them because of our fuel. We could fly roughly 2,100 miles with our fuel tanks and wing tanks. But we could not escort the 29s over the target, which was the prime, at the prime time that they encountered a lot of Jap fighter planes, and they'd commit themselves to a bomb run, and they can't veer, they just keep going straight. The Japs were hammering them real bad. This friend of mine.
Do I need to pause it?
And they live here in Spring, they're friends of mine. And he knew I was having, well, he's the one that talked to you people about getting my interview, Jim
Okay.
Pond. I don't know if you know the name or not, James Pond.
I-
Well, we heard they're gonna go in and take Iwo Jima,
Uh-huh.
which would put our fire squadron 800 miles closer to Japan. From there, we could escort the 29s completely over the target and back. And Iwo was one of the hardest fought island battles. And they were having troubles with the Japanese in these big, I got pictures of big bunkers. And they were annihilating the Marines and the infantry with crossfire. And
Do you want me to pause it?
from
Okay.
there, and we were ordered to ape on these bunkers.
Mm-hmm.
And when something like that happens, it just suffocates everything.
Mm-hmm.
And
So it's just the gas.
it's like gasoline. It explodes and sucks all the oxygen right out.
Mm-hmm. Were those dropped from the planes?
So we dropped them. They took our wing tanks and put these naphthalene tanks on. And of course, we used our guns to.
Was that more into the beginning of the battle on Iwo Jima, or?
It was right after, about 24 to 30 hours after the initial landing of the Marines, and they were getting hammered.
Mm-hmm.
There's a mountain there called it's many centuries ago, was an active volcano. And it's a high mountain on the end of the island. And it's nothing but saturated with caves. And every little niche and corner had a Jap in it.
Yep.
And our Marines and infantry took a tremendous loss. The island at one time spewed volcanic ash, and the island itself, you can go ahead with this.
I was making sure it's still on the right. Okay.
It was covered with volcanic ash, which was the closest I could call is like talcum powder.
Mm-hmm.
If you ever walked on a sandy beach, how hard it is, this was 5 to 6 times as hard. Now, how the Marines ever,
Walking through the ashes?
yeah, how they ever got a foothold on that island. And they finally did. And we did our part. Then they said they felt the island, after many days, there was 22,000 Japanese on the island, and only 100 or less were captured. The rest either were killed or committed suicide. If you've ever seen or heard of a movie called Letters from Iwo Jima
Mm-hmm.
by Clint Eastwood,
Mm-hmm.
that was the commanding general down there, General Kurabachi. And they had caves. I've got pictures of the caves. I've got a map that he had where his caves were. He committed suicide on the island, which many of the Japanese did. We lost over 8,000 troops on that island. They said that they had prepared some runways for us, and we would be based on Iwo Jima from then on.
Okay, so once it was secured, then you were no longer staying in Saipan?
No, we were assigned to Iwo Jima.
And what were the living quarters like there compared to where you had previously stayed?
We had Quonsets. They set up these 4-man, they didn't want more than 4 men in a given area, 4-man Quonset huts, and they were elevated off the ground. And the quarters were fair. We had fair chow. we were still ordered not to congregate. And we were getting a little sniping, but that only lasted about 3 weeks after we landed our base there.
Okay. Now, once you've got Iwo Jima secure here, your goal now is to just fly over Japan?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And how many missions had you flown at that point?
I flew 25.
Okay. So how did the missions go while you were trying to go over Japan?
I was a lucky one. I got there and back and accomplished my missions and escorted the 29s. We saved a lot of 29s by our efforts. I had a confirmed 3.5, what they call kills, and because another was in on the same, so I got half, they call it.
Were you able to communicate with family or friends any of this time that you were in the Pacific?
No.
No letters even?
No, we were under
Because you were
tight
the
security.
pilots?
Yeah, we were tight security.
Wow. Did you get pretty homesick then? Couldn't talk to
Yeah.
anybody?
Well, just our group. It was long days.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Did you ever get a break or any time on leave while you were there? Or
Or-
pass to just go into the city or something?
There was no cities there, it was
Okay.
just on the island. After so many hours of combat flying, we were what they call grounded for so many hours, minimum of 24 hours. And then we were back on flight status. Unless an emergency came up, we were actually on call all the time. But after completing a mission, we could get 24 hours off.
Did they ever wake you up at 3 in the morning and just make you hustle out there and go take a mission?
Not really, no. We had pretty tight schedule.
Your schedule?
They would be pre-flighting the B-29s on the flight lines and over on Tinian, and they would take off, and we would give them almost an hour head start, and then we'd catch up with them and escort them over the.
Did you ever land in any other, like Tinian or Japan or anything, or were you just flying over those areas?
Just as those areas, yeah.
Okay. So, were you in Iwo Jima when the bombs were dropped, or?
Yes.
Okay. Did you have any idea that was going to be
No.
happening?
I wasn't on that escort flight, and when the pilots had escorted the Enola Gay up to a certain point, came back and landed, and got up, wow, they must have hit a big ammo dump up there. Because I'd never seen an explosion like that in my life. They didn't know it was the first A-bomb,
Huh.
and that's was the A-bomb. I wasn't on, I'll be honest, I wasn't on any of the flights where the A-bombs were dropped.
Mhm. How did you feel when you heard the news of what it
I
actually
thought,
was?
wow, what's going to happen now? And the second one, they committed themselves to giving up.
Okay. So did you remain in Iwo Jima for quite a while after the ceasefire?
I was in Iwo, still going out on missions, and I got hurt on my last mission out. I got my left leg shot up pretty bad.
How did that happen?
A Jap Betty, we'd heard that a B-29 was down out in the drink. We used to do quite a bit of what they call search and see, get a fix on a down crew, and they'd send PBYs out and pick them up. And I was more concentrated on looking where that 29 might be, and a Jap Betty snuck up under me and hit my plane with 20 millimeter and shattered my left leg. And I lost rudder control. I radioed back to the base, Mayday, Mayday. They said, what's your Mayday? I said, I've been hit. I said, I don't know how bad, but I said, I can't use my left leg. I don't know what's the matter.
Mm-hmm.
And with all the stuff on it, I finally got squared away, and I looked down and I see blood coming out of my flight boot. I thought, man, got a little problem. Then I said, I'm vectoring for home, give me a vector, and I'm about 150 miles out. And I full throttled at about 300 miles an hour. I said, I'm coming in wheels up because I have no rudder control. It's your prerogative. So I blew the canopy over Mount Suribachi and crash land into Iwo. They picked me up, took me out of there. You ever watch MASH? They had a kind of a first aid. They rushed me into there, did what they could, sent me back to Saipan, which is a pretty good hospital. And,
The actual building there?
Yeah, set up. They did what they could there, and they sent me to Hawaii.
So what did they tell you was wrong with your leg?
Said you got your bones shattered in your leg.
Is it the lower part of your leg?
Yeah, it's
Okay.
on my left, down the calf of my left leg. I went there, and I was in the base hospital in Hawaii for quite some time. And they transported me to Fort Lewis, Washington, to a big general hospital and a separation center. I spent quite some time there, and that's when I first notified. I was married. I married in Las Vegas while I was stationed there, and I had a son born while I was overseas, and I got in touch, told them where I was, and they came up there, and they said, we can make paperwork here, and you can take a discharge, or whatever. I said, I just want to, if I can't fly, I want out of here as quick as I can. They said, well, you've been injured, you're entitled. I said, the quickest paperwork I can sign, just get me out of here. So I signed off and got out of the service. They raised my rank from lieutenant to captain to give me more out pay.
That's nice. This is in 1945 then?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so, and I opted to get out of service.
And then when you were, at that point, were you still recovering from your leg injury, or?
Yeah. It was coming along real good. I was getting around. I could walk on it good. It aches once in a while, but in general, I feel I can make a good living. I'm an engineer. I don't need heavy lifting. So I said, I'll just opt to get out of here. So I took my base pay, my accumulated pay, and they, like I say, they upped me a rank, which gave me considerably more up pay. I was out in 46. I got out of the service.
Had your wife been staying in Las Vegas while you were gone?
Yes, she was I met her. She worked on the base as a civil service worker. She was in the parachute rigging department.
Okay.
That's how I met her, because I used to go down and pick up my chutes and that on the base there. And that's how I met her there.
So did you move back to Las Vegas after that?
No, I left there and came back to Birmingham, Michigan. And I lived in Birmingham for quite some time. And we had a court, had 4 buddies. They were older than me, but we palled around. And we used to hang out at Shane's drugstore in Birmingham, Michigan. I don't know if you ever saw on the radio or TV, Happy Days deal. This is where we were at Shane's drugstore.
Okay.
They come, hey, Jim, where do you see Jim? Have you seen Mac? Have you seen? They all went into the Air Force too. And unfortunately, they never come back. And Birmingham was kind of a small, close-knit town. I was a little apprehensive coming back to town because why me?
Yeah.
And I heard a couple of remarks. Jim must have hidden in a cave or somehow. That's how he got back. Kind of remarks. And I pulled out of there and moved to Grand Rapids.
Okay.
I lost 4.
Sorry. you been working at that point when you stayed in Birmingham for a short time?
Yes. I heard an ad they wanted a designer for a new line of store fixture equipment. And Elmore Store Fixture Company. I went down there, made application. The next day I got a call and I went down, got the job. And I worked there for quite a while. And there was such a tight rein on some metal supplies in it because of the war effort, that a lot of the stores were hobbling along on antiquated equipment, and Elmore got into the act right at the right time. Mm-hmm. They were doing big bear markets, which would be similar to Myers up here, and Wrigley's. And I had some friends in Grand Rapids, and I came up one weekend, and I shopped around, and Myers was just getting started on division in Grand Rapids. And I went and talked to him, and then he said, yeah, we're going to put up a new store, we're going to need shelving and that. So I went back to the company in Birmingham, Elmore Fixture Company. Actually, they're in Detroit. And told him, I said, there looks like a market in Grand Rapids. Mm-hmm. And I said, I'd like to get out of my hometown because of some personal things. And they said, well, we'll set you up on salary and commission. So that's how I got into Grand Rapids.
Okay.
And I put in several stores in Grand Rapids. Kind of not saturated, but it got kind of slow. And Rapid Design Engineering had an ad, a well-known engineering firm in Grand Rapids, and I hired in there, and I was with 14 years with Rapid Design Engineer. I left there because I kept reading an ad. The man was looking for an engineer, and that a company called Butterball Farms.
Okay.
And Leo Peters owned Butterball Farms at that time. I went down and talked to him. I says, I could do your design stuff for you. So I did a lot of their out-of-house design for him. And he kept bugging me, Jim, he says, why don't you come and work for me and run my company for me and be my engineer? So I got talked into managing Butterball Farms and doing engineering for quite some time.
What year was that in?
That was in the 70s.
Okay.
And I was with them for 20 some odd years in Butterball Farm.
And you retired there then?
And I retired out of there.
Okay.
Then I got tired of sitting around and I went into Menards. They just opened. They were about a month or two open in Alpine and Grand Rapids, Menards Incorporated, Menards store. And I went in there and I said, I'm no youngster. I just wonder if you hire any older people. Well, what do you got in mind? He said, well, go ahead and make out an application. So I made out an application, and I lived in Cannonsburg at that time, and it was about a 25-minute drive. And I just pulled up, I had a long driveway, and my wife's waving, I said, oh, what's the matter? Just don't put the car away, they want you back at Menards. So I drove back to Menards. They hired me. I was 13 years with Menards.
Oh.
I'm retired out of there now.
When did you completely retire? What year was that?
07.
07. What have you been doing since then?
Some odd things. My brother-in-law and his wife owned Preferred Tool and Die shop, a good-sized tool and die shop on West River Road in Grand Rapids. And he said, Jim, he said, we got a lot of programming for CNC cutting. You put it on tape and that, put it in the machine, and it follows whatever how to cut metal shapes and so forth. And he said, we could use you a couple of 3 days a week. So I did some programming for that. Well, my wife, this is her sister, the woman there is a sister of my wife's.
Mm-hmm.
And Tim, the owner, is a brother-in-law. Well, they're in a big personal divorce deal, real bad.
Yeah.
And I had a nephew working there, and they let him go because they thought he was too tight with and that. And I could see the handwriting on the wall, so I graciously said, I think I better get out of here.
Okay.
Because it's very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And I could see a lot of restrictions coming up about not being in the office and doing these things, you know. And so I got out of there. So I'm not really doing much except work around my house and
Mm-hmm.
some handy stuff. Help my son at his house doing some work and that.
Did you ever go to any World War II reunions?
Yeah, I belong to a fighter group reserve, Air Force Reserve group.
Mm-hmm.
And we meet at least twice a year.
Always in Michigan?
Yes, we have, the meetings used to be in Muskegon. They moved it to Grand Rapids because it got pretty good size.
Oh.
And we meet at Safey's out east in Grand Rapids there.
Mm-hmm.
And it's dwindling. I've been in there about 10 years now. Each meeting where Joe's gone, Mac's gone.
Yeah.
Because we're all in our 80s. I'm 86 years old.
Mm-hmm.
So it's dwindling. But believe it or not, nobody sits there and says, boy, I really, you think you had it tough, were you? It's none of that. It's, hey, remember that night we goofed off and went to town
Yeah.
and did this? That's the kind of chatter that we've often wondered, they reserve a room for us. And we've often wondered, as people walk by that room, because it's a big sign out there, World War II Reserve Fighter Group meeting. You mean those guys helped win the war?
Mm-hmm.
See us old codgers.
Did you want to go over some of your pictures
I
that you
don't know
brought?
if you were interested in it or not.
Yeah, I have to, hold on.
The P-38 fighter plane that was quite prevalent in the South Pacific. Major Bong had over 30 kills, and they were the hard plane to fly because it was twin engine and very, very delicate to handle.
Is that you in front of it?
No, it's a mechanic.
Okay.
This fellow here, Phil McCullough, used to date the only man I ran into these are all from Iwo Jima,
Mm-hmm.
that I ran into, and he dated my older sister in high school.
Okay.
And these are all mechanics. This is some history on General Kurabachi's cave.
Mm-hmm.
There were the letters to Iwo. This is the general they were talking about. This might be a little better one too. Yeah.
What is this a picture of?
This here,
Yes.
the only vegetation on Iwo Jima.
Wow, okay. And these are just the cave areas?
This is the caves. They bulldozed out so they could get into these caves because they had other entrances above and come down. And they were trying to get the Japs out of there, so they bulldozed it. This is the back side of Mount Suribachi, and every hole enough to hold a man when
Oh.
the initial landings took place.
Okay.
That's me, and there's a bunch of caves in the back. That's Jim me up there.
Mm-hmm.
These are shells from the Navy when they were shelling it that never exploded. There were some landmines back here. They cleared them and took the sign down. They built a church, believe it or not. These are just acting up for some land crabs. This is on top of Mount Suribachi, so you can see the initial landings were down below here, so the Japs had a real insight. This is one of our tanks that was battered up before it got into some empty shells. An old ship out there that sunk in the harbor. I had just landed, and
they couldn't get this Jeep started. So I said, I'll help push, and that's me. Because we left it, I was out of my flight because we left it in the plane. This is kind of gruesome. This is the remains of a Japanese soldier.
Can't really tell from here.
We had rats on the island as big as cats. The Japanese,
They're as big as cats.
they were big, huge. They would attack you because they were being starved to death because our sanitation was much different than the Japanese.
Right.
No food stuff to our areas. Everything was kept in metal containers, and the rats were going to get starved.
So they would,
They were vicious.
wow.
Well, one night we heard shooting, and the next morning we said to the guards, I said, what was that shooting? He says, well, a Jap tried to get through the perimeter, got hung up in the wire. And he says, when we just left it, came back in the, when daylight, we went there, and this is what's
The
left.
rats were eating at him?
This is what's left of it.
Nice. Okay,
Kind of gruesome.
yeah.
That's in about an 8-hour period.
Wow.
This is just shots of where the initial landings came, taken from the top of Mount Suribachi. This is also from Suribachi. This is the backside of Mount Suribachi. This is a crater. That's where the active volcano centuries ago erupted up from. It's more of the mountain. This is some of the fortifications that that the Marines and the infantry were faced with. It's hard to see through you, but how thick the walls are. That's how, these are the ones that I was talking about we had to use flame on
Okay.
to get them out of. And this is all volcanic ash. It's one of the bunkers because they had tunnels going out from under, so they just bulldozed around. Those are tunnels that the Japs would, when they would try to get them out of there, they would just go down below and come back up again. There's another that was hit by the Navy, some of their bunkers. They've been preparing this island for 20 some odd years. That's just a B-29 that landed there. It was all shot up. This B-29 landed there. They had 7 people on that were killed on that particular plane. They carried a crew of 11. And this is that same plane there.
Okay.
This is a one-man helicopter. Sometimes planes so bad they didn't want to try and land it. They would ditch it, as we call it, down in the ocean, and this would run out and pick them up.
Okay.
This is just some rocks that came off of Mount Suribachi from the shelling. This is an unexploded Navy shell. This picture was taken by me out of my cockpit over Hiroshima in Japan.
That was after the bomb?
That was before.
Before the bomb, okay.
That's that same 29 getting ready to go back to Saipan. Got repaired there. This is that same plane, how bad it was shot up.
Okay.
This is a Marine, over 8,000 troops were killed. This is a Marine cemetery that they put up on Iwo.
Wow.
This is the PBY, that type of plane that would go out and pick up down air crews in the ocean. It's just a Black Widow fighter plane that they brought in. Some more Black Widows. This here is a B-17 with a boat strapped underneath it.
Okay.
They call it a Dumbo. If they found their crews floating around, they would fly that over and parachute it down. And it had supplies in it.
Okay.
And the crews could get out of these little life rafts and climb into that boat. Then they'd sink the boat after they were picked up by PBUIs. Didn't want the Japs to get their hands on
Right.
it, so they would sink it. That's a B-24 Liberator. That's a night fighter, plane that they instigated because we were getting a lot of night raids. And it was the first ones that had a radar in the nose. So they had a radar man plus the pilot. And all exhausts were muffled. You couldn't see when they were up at night. You didn't know where they were. The Japs didn't. They would home in with their radar on possible Jap fighter plane or bomber. And when they got locked in on it, they would turn their lights on and shoot it down. This is more 29s. Heller. This was some of the crew quarters here, not very fancy. That's that same B-29. This is kind of gruesome, just Marines.
Okay.